Hi YouTube, been a minute. With the looming TikTok ban, it's time for me to start posting more on YouTube. And due to my inability to seem to fit things within a slight bit over a minute on TikTok, actually I think this is going to be a pretty sizable change for us. For starters today, I want to talk about tank reworks. The state of tank in Overwatch 2 is ass. And whether we go back to 6v6 or stay in 5v5, significant changes to how tanks play need to be made. My thesis for this is that by sanding off a lot of the edges and hard design decisions that these characters have, we can effectively make it so the tank is a lot more enjoyable to play regardless of format. If it doesn't work in 5v5, we are set up for a better transition to 6v6. Diva's biggest problem in my opinion is her lack of range pressure, and the fact that boosters is kind of a clunky mobility option. If I want to get away from this guy, my choices are to backtrack with DM up or to boost out while taking full damage from behind. I think that giving Diva some sort of thrust back while DMing that could be considerably slower but slightly faster than she moves now would be a decent enough fix for the mobility problem. But as for range, I think simply by tightening the spread a bit and a slight decrease to her falloff damage would go miles in making Diva a bit more flexible to play. To counteract this, we may need to nerf the missile damage and also nerf the duration of the defense matrix itself, but I think quality of life changes like that would be more than enough for most Diva players to enjoy the game. Also, something else I forgot to mention, Diva's bomb is kinda cheeks. It's great for farming clips in metal ranks or zoning, but it's a really boring ultimate. What if instead we kinda, took a bit more inspiration of the game that inspired Diva's kit as a whole? Titanfall, and we make it so that her ejection is instead a nuclear ejection from Titanfall, meaning that Diva enters sort of a doomed state, a second life. I mean, most Diva players use bomb as a second life anyway, so why don't we lean into that fact? It would essentially refresh Diva's health bar with all white health, but she can't be healed, and it decays like a sound barrier. And she's basically got about 3 to 4 seconds max of using this ability with all refreshed cooldowns before it explodes. If Diva doesn't get out of her mech in time, she dies. So I'm entering my doomsday here. I'm fighting, I'm doing damage, I'm shooting my missiles and stuff, right? But I didn't think about it long enough. Oh no, I didn't eject in time. Fuck. But if I were to eject in time, it'd be similar to like a Farah jump jet, right? Like catapults me really high up in the air. Maybe the explosion of the Diva bomb does less damage but more knockback, and does self-damage to Diva but also knocks her back. Now for a final little thing, once Diva leaves her mech, take a page from Diva's very own cinematic, and we let Diva do self-damage to the mech. Because if you break the mech while it's exploding, it explodes faster. So if you jump out and you start shooting the mech, maybe it even has the crit point on the back like it does in the short. Next up we have Doomfist, which is going to be a throughput of a lot of characters. I truly do believe that in 5v5, having some form of CC mitigation is necessary for every tank. So where we're going to be starting with this is in Power Block. The initial second or so of Power Block, at the very least, should be CC immune. Or, if we want to get really crazy with this, we could even give Doomfist something similar to a Brig shield. Once this shield is broken, Doomfist gets Empowered Punch for the same or even more damage than it can currently. And then to counteract the fact that we've just given Doomfist a lot of tools that make him a lot harder to punish with CC, is that we take some of the power away from Empowered Punch itself and possibly give him an Empowered Slam. We make it so that by getting Empowered Fist, it gives us one of the 2 charges back. Visually it gives us both, but this is like a Zarya bubble. This is a shared cooldown, the Empowered ability. Because of the fact that Empowered Punch kind of leads to Doomfist playstyle being kind of shit, we could axe Empowered Punch altogether and make it so that Doomfist has a bit of a tighter spread, so he has more threat at range, and that when his power block is shattered, rather than resetting these cooldowns with an empowered ability, instead we just shorten the cooldowns, so that balancing this character is less of a nightmare. Next up we have Queen, and I hope you liked me talking about ways to block CC, because I think in the first second of Junker Queen's shout, she should have CC immunity. Because when the main counterplay of your character is to dodge CC by having a small hitbox and then missing, you're not actually counterplaying, you're just relying on enemies to be bad. There's also a Yeetle video recently talking about how you could make it so that Junker Queen has longer range knife. The Queen's knife already has insane range. But maybe we add something else to it. Maybe the further the knife travels, the more bleed damage it does, or the longer the bleed damage sticks on someone, or it even just does more damage, so that we can actually cross-map people with this ability. Other than that, I think slightly tightening Queen's spread, not even a lot, just a teeny tiny bit, would go miles into making her feel a bit more rewarding to play at range, because one of her biggest problems is getting dinked by people at long range. Mauga. Alright, so Mauga is not like these other characters. Mauga's changes need to be a bit more systemic. Mauga's problem is most gameplay of him consists of just doing this for ages. So I actually have a bit of a fix for this. We cut the ammo supply in half, making it so that if we were to double gun shoot this Roadhog, this would be about the entire duration of which that we can do that. However, we then increase his reload speed. I don't have a number off the top of my head, so let's just go with double, meaning the reload would look like this. Now these were a lot of nerfs, but we're gonna keep going. We're gonna gut self-heal completely from Mauga's kit, and instead just leave the overhealth generation portion. This takes out Mauga's biggest counter in the game, anti-heals and the DPS passive. This makes it so that while that still hurts his support lineup, it doesn't hurt Mauga personally. We can leave self-healing while in Cardiac Overdrive, but the bigger benefit to Cardiac Overdrive will be the fact that while using it, he has a faster reload time. Meaning that it would make more sense to be sort of spacing out your damage with solo guns. And because of the reduced ammo capacity, the longer reload, the fact that burst damage is worse, the fact that his self-healing output is worse, we are going to buff the fire damage on Mauga's chain gun in both duration and damage tanks. And we're going to drastically buff his fall-off range so that he actually is a threat at range. And possibly also buff his crit damage, but only the headshot side. We'll separate it so that body shot crits are one thing, but that headshot crits are much more rewarded, meaning that Mauga is now a very mechanically skill-focused, long-range threat. Next up we have Charge. This is mostly just quality of life changes. Charge should have more horizontal mobility to it, so that you can actually clear small gaps. The Stomp of Charge shouldn't completely cancel your forward momentum, but instead be more of like a small leap, and thus you should be able to buffer the cancel from the initial startup. This ability should not be cancelable, and neither should his ult, because the windows for these are so small it never really happens on purpose. It's usually just a slightly mistimed reaction to an enemy's ability. And I also think that while in cage fight, we can actually give Mauga back his infinite ammo that he used to. So that Mauga's current playstyle of spamming both guns infinitely for a really long time is now merely a threat while in cage fight. On top of this, we can give Mauga a bit more armor, and we've changed Mauga from a character that is completely reliant on self-healing and shooting the tank. Next up, we got Orisa. I'm going to say the thing everyone has always been saying when it comes to an Orisa rework: let Orisa fly. It's silly, and that one time that we got to do it in the April Fool's patch, it was actually pretty fun. But whenever people say let Orisa fly, that's kind of the end of it. I have kind of an insane rework for Orisa that I've been cooking up for a long time. Orisa is the only character in the game that has an overheat mechanic, but the overheat mechanic is so boring. Fortify reduces heat generated by your weapon. Javelin Spin gets rid of heat that was built up by your weapon. These abilities suck ass. It's supposed to be a sort of mechanical skill-focused thing, but it doesn't turn into that. It just turns into your ability cycle lets you keep shooting on Orisa. So instead of using abilities with cooldowns for this character, I say we go all in on the idea of a meter-based character. Each ability that you use costs meter. We make it so that the overheat point of this meter buildup starts a bit lower down, maybe closer to like 75%, or maybe even 60%. But we add it so that each of the ability costs are overheat. And maybe we increase the amount of overheat the meter builds up so that you have a bit more time to use these abilities. All of these abilities would have a flat 1 to 2 second cooldown period after being used, or maybe it's a 1 second cooldown shared between everything. So Javelin, we have, maybe costing about 25% of your meter. What the fuck did that bot just do? Spear Spin would cost about 20% of your meter requirement. Fortify would cost about 40% of your meter requirement. And shooting would cost about half of what it does currently. But we don't just stop there. We can make it so that when you cancel Fortify earlier, that counts for less overheat. And of course, we remove all of the overheat depletion stuff these abilities currently have. But let's say we fly up to high ground Could we give Orisa some silly shit that she can do with the high ground? Maybe if we fortify in midair and land on the ground, we do a small sort of like venture style slam, booping people up into the air and doing some damage. Then this brings us into the craziest part of this Orisa rework. Overheat is not just a negative resource. Overheat has a benefit as well. So any ability that you use while you're in the red zone, right, has an increased effect. So maybe Fortify, when you get to the red zone, starts emanating out a bit of like a heat wave that does slight damage over time for just being near Orisa. Or maybe it increases her movement speed. Maybe Javelin Spin moves even faster and adds a bit of a burn effect. Or Javelin does a burn DOT. This incentivizes managing your meter well. But it can even be more than that. We can make it so that staying in the overheat range has all of these positive effects, but it also sets Orisa on fire. So you get more aggressive options, but you're at more risk. And we reintroduce the manual reload to vent the heat. But it's considerably longer than it is now. And if we aren't sold on all of the abilities being increases to the overheat mechanic, we could make it so that Javelin Spin is the only one that decreases your overheat mechanic, because I think Javelin Spin is the least annoying of Orisa's abilities. But make it so that Javelin Spin is reliant on you having over 50% heat buildup in order to be used. The ult, similar to how Fortify does already, which is just sort of to suck in a bunch of people, and then you wait for their Curie to cleanse so they all get out, and otherwise you get a slam for some damage. With this proposed rework, would have damage on it land, but you'd be sacrificing the initial yank in, so you'd have to be a lot more skillful with it. Oh, and one other thing I forgot to add, the gun itself, when it gets to the overheat levels, would do increased burning damage on top of it currently. Ramatra's a pretty easy one. Basically, it's just the Doomfist treatment. Characters with blocks in this game are kind of booty cheek ass, because their options are sit there and take absolutely no damage, just completely nothing. Just sit here taking quite literally no damage. Or get CC'd and explode. So we make it so that Barrier has a less health-filled version of it that projects in front of Ramatra while he is blocked, but it is on a shared cooldown with the normal shield. This allows us to reduce the cooldown of shield and probably also reduce its health to like half. 1,000 hit points on a shield is insane. And also just the simple one of, in the trailer when they announced Ramatra, they showed him yanking a Mercy out of the sky. But this ability is barely even good at keeping like Genji's grounded. Let it go to the fucking skybox, man. Why not? It's what it was advertised to do, and tanks need more winning matchups against flyers anyways. Any character that gets pulled down takes damage. Further up you get pulled down, the more damage you do. And we make it so that by pressing the ability again in air, it can make the field in midair. This could make it so it's a bit of a skill shot where you can like yank someone down from the sky and do a shitload of damage to them. Next up we have Reinhardt. So for Reinhardt, my main idea is giving him a rage mechanic. We're basically going to take his shield health, we're going to chop it in half, because 1,400 shields is insane. But because this is a giga nerf to Reinhardt, the rage mechanic needs to be something big. Now this ability would be on a cooldown, but it would basically be a dash forward that Reinhardt would get while in shield, similar to Brig's shield bash, but a little bit further, doing a bit more damage and activating Reinhardt's Rage. And my idea for this is kind of similar to Orisa. Rage is a meter that Reinhardt builds up, and it's only through taking shield damage. But while Reinhardt's Rage is active, depending on how big you've gotten this meter, you can do a lot of stuff. This incentivizes good shield management, because the better you manage that small ass shield, the longer you get to do all of these awesome things. While in Rage mode, charge cannot be cancelled by CC. Reinhardt swings faster. Reinhardt moves faster. Fire strikes can do a damage over time burn. And if your shield breaks, you can't shield bash till your shield comes back. No shield bash, no rage, no fun stuff. For Roadhog, this is a bit of a tricky one. Roadhog has a really bad time with snipers. You know what's a great way to deal with snipers in games that aren't Overwatch? Smokes. You know what Roadhog likes to do? So maybe, instead of just putting this chemical into his mask puffs out the smoke around Roadhog in a big ass fart cloud that obscures vision. And this fart cloud has a couple little effects to it. It could either reduce damage taken from allies who are standing within the cloud, or do some self-healing to allies that stay within the cloud. Maybe it does a little bit of both, but it also cuts off sight lines. Now for the enemy side of things, this smoke is going to work similar to like a caustic gas in Apex Legends or Viper smokes in Valorant. So if you go inside of it, you start taking a bit of damage over time, but you're also revealed to Roadhog's allies. The most silly part of Roadhog is environmental kills with Hook, and I never want them to get rid of that. But I don't really like this part of Hook. The coolest part of Roadhog that I've ever seen, the part that makes him look like an absolutely awesome character to play, is Slingshot tech. Which was something you could do where you would like cancel your hook with your ultimate, which I'm not really good enough to do, nor do I know if it still works in the game. But why not make it just a key part of Roadhog's kit? Make it so that you can cancel hook and use the momentum to catapult enemies in other directions. And kind of brings him back to his roots of just a really silly character. Now you're gonna have to use your imagination for this because I'm not good at hitting slingshots. Or hooks apparently, what the fuck? They're only really good when there's environmental kills to be had. So what about the other 90% of the time where you've just lost your ability to one-shot? Well, maybe we add impact damage on slingshotting enemies into things. So I slam Tracer into this wall, she takes like maybe that much damage, maybe a little less. If I miss my team and catapult them over to that high ground over there, yeah, they might take damage, but I'm not gonna kill them over there. But I also think we could do something silly with Pigpen by making it so that maybe the fart cloud that he leaves behind him slows and damages enemies over time, similar to how Pigpen does currently. Maybe Pigpen is just a fucking landmine, and he gets a couple charges of it. So we can drop a bunch of little mines inside of his fart cloud that you won't see, and then they'll explode on you for a bit of burst damage. And to counteract all of these giga buffs we've done to Roadhog, we make it so that he has a bit more range pressure by tightening his spread up a bit, but decreases actual damage. And yes, I know the Hog players love to say when Roadhog doesn't have his one-shot, he is useless. But that's because his entire kit is built around a one-shot and self-healing. If we instead make him built around trapping people, shutting off sightlines, and catapulting people across the map, the silliest parts of Roadhog are still there, but the annoying parts of Roadhog have changed to new annoying parts for Roadhog. And as an added benefit to this, things like Kiriko cleanse or explosives could clear the smoke, adding more utility to the game and more interactions. Now for Sigma, I don't really think anything needs to be changed with Sigma. I honest to God think he's just a 5v5 tank they put in 6v6. But the most infuriating part of playing Sigma, I'm on low ground, I want to get to high ground, I gotta waddle my slow ass all the way over there. My idea with Sigma is, I think it should have a bit of a mobility option, where by double tapping the spacebar, he can slightly fly a little bit, similar to his ultimate. It doesn't need to be a fast fly or anything, or an escape option. Maybe it's just a slower version of the fly he has currently in his ultimate, lasts like 1 to 2 seconds. While using this ability, it could be really clunky too. Maybe he, again, only can shoot. For Winston, we have to go to another mode, because the Winston rework has already happened in PvE and the training mode. Give him chain lightning on his right click. But the way in which we do this is a bit more smart. When Winston hits one person with his lightning, it does the initial burst damage that it does currently. But then it will chain between the two players, or however many players are around, over and over again until they space out or are cleansed in some way. We might have to put this right click on a cooldown, but honestly, I think that's really all Winston needs. That and maybe a slight 10 to 20% buff against burst damage. But again, that could be something that gets lumped into the tank passive as a whole. Anything exceeding a set number of damage per second has like a 10% damage nerf for tanks. So your Bastions, your Reapers, your Tank Busters. That one time that you got headshot by a Widowmaker on Junker Queen, it just insta-killed you because you had taken 50 damage. Those things could be solved a little bit by adding that. Now for Wrecking Ball, I think that it's just a really simple answer for how to make him better. His rework has added a lot to his kit, but there's a few little things that need to be changed about him. Wrecking Ball needs to constantly have a boop no matter what speed he is rolling. Yesterday I got body blocked by a Kiriko in a doorway. You're telling me that this giant hulking mass, through which just the act of slamming down into the ground catapults people into the air, can't move a lady who I swear to God is probably like 80 pounds soaking wet. I'm not saying this needs to be a boop that does damage, I'm just saying that rolling into enemies should move them slowly, and accepting things like Orisa Fortum. And because of the fact boops already exist in the game, it would move tanks less. The next thing is Ball's adaptive shields. I personally think this is a pretty solid change for Wrecking Ball, but I think Wrecking Ball needs to do more than just give allies shields. Because we already have a character in this game who has a cooldown cycle that used to be built around giving allies overhealth that became problematic in the form of Junker Queen's Shout. Give allies a small speed boost when he gives them adaptive shields. And also, there needs to be an incentive for Ball to give teammates adaptive shields. Because currently, why the fuck would I ever give my allies shields? I get shields from enemies, right? And I give them to my teammates, and I lose health. And on top of that, it's an effect that isn't really beneficial to them. So I'm putting myself more at risk, and I'm not really helping my teammates. This is such a no-brainer change. I don't know, honest to God, how it wasn't implemented in the game from the beginning. Make adaptive shields cooldown less based on how many teammates you give it to. Because yeah, sure, maybe it does nothing. Maybe even with a speed boost added onto it, it's still shit. Give the ball a selfish reward for doing it. Because currently, there's no reason to do it. This way, even if it was a borderline useless ability I'm giving my teammates still see that I'm trying to help them, and I get a selfish reward for it. Also, remove Ball's cast time on ultimate. Similar to Mauga's, there is never a reason why an enemy should intentionally cancel that, and if you say so, no, that's not true. And also, Ball needs some form of CC immunity. Now, there are kind of two ways that I could see doing CC immunity on Ball. There's the easy one, which is similar to what we did with Junker Queen. Popping adaptive shields, there would be an instant second in which Ball is CC immune. Or we could go the Mauga charge route, where after maybe the slam finishes, Wrecking Ball can continue to hold down the ability and go into a sort of unstoppable charge similar to Mauga in a form of like super duper fireball, where he can't be stunned out. Meaning you gotta hack, sleep, hinder the ball before he lands, because the second that he lands, assuming that he charges up, he's gonna hit you for full speed. Also, I'm forgetting whether or not I mentioned this. When Ball gets CC'd, he should get the reduced grapple cooldown. There is no point in doing a reduced grapple cooldown if it is not to address him getting stunned out of grapple. Next up we have Zarya. It's gonna be a little bit controversial for Zarya. Zarya's beam currently has a range of about 16 meters, or just about 3 cast rolls. And Zarya's secondary fire projectile is good, but doesn't really make up for a lack of range pressure. I see two ways in which we could reasonably fix this. My ideal solution would be a mix of both. I think we could just remove the range cap on Zarya's beam as a whole, but make it so that the beam has fall off damage. So if I'm at like 40 meters at max charge trying to shoot this bot, the damage output would be less than that of a 0% Zarya right now up close. Another small thing, we increase the self knockback on Zarya's bounce, and maybe add a bit of movement speed to her once she does it, so that Zarya has a better mobility option and can more consistently contest like mid to high ground. And secondly, I think we could increase the speed which the projectile has. Also, I think Grav is kind of not the best ultimate. I think that Grav's damage over time should be a bit more than it is currently. Or you need someone else to ult into it in order to do anything. Or you solo ult someone. And I don't think that's very fun. Anyways, that does it for tank reworks. I know that a lot of this sounds insane, but the fact of the matter with tank in Overwatch 2 is there need to be insane changes made to it in order to make it better. And also, most of these changes were gigabuffs for these characters, and I know that. But the thing about gigabuffing these characters so they're more well-rounded means that the more problematic portions of their kit can be nerfed. Or, if that's not the case and they're just becoming a bit too dominant, flat-out health nerfs can usually be more than enough to fix these characters. By making more tanks well-rounded with more solutions to problems, we can start to power creep back these health numbers, because we made tank into more about managing resources and gave them more answers to more problems. So the skill ceiling actually ends up being raised a bit on tanks because they have more answers to options, but less resources to do those options. I think tank needs a drastic patch like this in 5v5, and if this patch doesn't work, we can always go back to 6v6. Because in making all of these tanks more well-rounded and harder to counterpick, we've also set them up perfectly for a transition back to 6v6. Because tank synergies were a problem. Not in the sense of things like Orisa Sigma being run on every rank in the times of Double Shield, but in the sense of characters like Roadhogs showing up and absolutely throwing your ranked games because you were in Plat and they wanted their priority passes for their DPS role. By making the tanks more well-rounded, more comps can be made with those tanks, more of the correct comps. Meaning that, hypothetically, if these changes went through and the game still felt like shit to play, or other players were now pissed off that tanks were too strong and too good at their job, they can be giga nerfed, slotted into 6v6, and tank quality of life has increased, and everyone else's quality of life has increased as well. That's the real scheme behind all of this.